Okay. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being here for our second day of this opening reception for Creativity in the Time of COVID, the Art of Grieving. We hope you'll stay for the rest of our exciting talks and workshops this afternoon, and we're really happy to have you here. So my name is Sara. I think I've spoken with all of you. I'm a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of History of Science at Harvard, and I completed my PhD in English Literature and Science and Technology Studies at the University of British Columbia. And I will not go further in my own bio. Today, I'll begin by talking about grieving in a pandemic before shifting our attention to where we are in the pandemic today and how we can pay tribute to those who are no longer with us. On a warm day in October 2020, I found myself staring at fallen leaves in a forested burial ground in Toronto. My parents and I stood back from the constellation of mourners, all of whom had been asked to sign their names on a contact tracing form before entering the service. We surrounded the departed's grieving family, together, apart. A few mourners entered the inner circle to hug members of the family, while others, like my parents and I, held back. Touch, the most fundamental form of care, felt too dangerous. Tears revealed what was concealed behind masks. As the children scattered their mother's ashes, dozens of family members across the world watched over Zoom. The woman whose death we were mourning did not die from COVID-19, but the pandemic prevented many of her loved ones from being there that day. This was a common experience for millions of people worldwide who were forced to grieve in isolation. Mourning is a shared social practice, but the social distancing and safety protocols put in place during the pandemic required many to mourn in ways that complicated the grieving process. Most contemporary theories of grief can be traced back to Freud's Mourning and Melancholia, which suggested that grief functions to detach thoughts and emotions from the dead so that the bereaved can move on with their lives. As psychologist John Archer explains, this can be achieved only through an active process, later termed grief work, whereby attachment to the dead person is given up through continued confrontation of memories and thoughts associated with the loss. Grief work requires coming to terms with the feelings that we encounter after a loss. But what happens when we are unable to directly confront death? Despite reinventing rituals online, the familiar customs that many of us leaned on in times of loss were denied for years during the height of the pandemic. Few were given the opportunity to attend wakes and visitations or sit Shiva in person. Burial practices also changed dramatically. For many, there could be no passing of a shovel to pour dirt on a grave, no washing of a body as compelled in Islam and Judaism. As the political scientist Rebecca Entris notes, many customs for the afterlife are based on religion. Are based on religion, and inevitably, some religious requirements could not be followed, leaving families with anxiety about their loved ones in the afterlife. Such unresolved feelings were heightened in families of COVID victims, some of whom were unable to claim the remains of their loved ones. Regardless of faith, without a proper burial or confirmation of death, it is much more difficult to accept or cope with the loss. These unresolved feelings brought on by disrupted burial rites and COVID-related deaths can be understood as ambiguous losses. The term is used to describe a loss that occurs without closure, which may complicate and delay the grieving process. For example, when a loved one goes missing in the military and dies, family members may still feel that person's presence, even though they remain physically absent. In the case of healthy individuals who died suddenly from COVID-19, these ambiguous losses were magnified by the safety protocols that prevented family members from seeing their loved ones prior to and following their deaths. This lack of closure can make it feel impossible to let go of the person and move forward. Every loss is unique, and every person struggles with different kinds of grief. While we mourn the loss of loved ones during the pandemic, many also mourn the loss of homes, jobs, routines, and stability. Efforts to prevent the spread of the virus impacted how children and teenagers learned and socialized, how people dated and developed relationships, the ways in which people worshiped and received support. Hello? Hello. The ways in which people worshiped and received support were also dramatically altered, as well as how people exercised and ate, sought entertainment and medical care. We were forced to be vigilant about the holidays and special events out of fear that these celebrations might become superspreader events. Weddings and conferences were canceled, life events delayed. This tension between physical safety and mental well-being pervaded our everyday lives. In many ways, we grieved the loss of life as we knew it. And yet, we adapted. And we were fortunate to live in a technological age that afforded many of us the opportunity to stay in touch with our loved ones, community members, and colleagues virtually. I attended birthday parties, weddings, baby showers, and taught classes over Zoom for years. Today, we live in an increasingly hybridized world because of that time we spent online. Some people have referred to the height of COVID as the long 2020, a period of deep uncertainty that continues to disorient our collective sense of time. So where are we with COVID today? Historian of medicine Charles Rosenberg has said that epidemics ordinarily end with a whimper, not a bang. This March will mark 5 years since the WHO announced that the novel coronavirus was a global pandemic. As of October 2024, the WHO has recorded over 7 million deaths worldwide. This does not account for the excess mortality of people who have died due to COVID-related complications, or the millions with long COVID who continue to suffer. How then do we memorialize something we are still living through? For a powerful example, we can look to the AIDS memorial quilt, which was first conceived of early in the HIV/AIDS epidemic in 1985. The quilt offered grieving individuals the opportunity to commemorate their loved ones who had died from HIV/AIDS by crafting a panel in their honor. For many, these panels were created in lieu of a proper funeral service. At the time, the stigma associated with HIV/AIDS was so great, and fears about handling the remains of people with the virus so widespread, that funerals were simply not possible for many victims. However, in defiance of this stigma, the quilt grew exponentially over the following years, as more people died from HIV/AIDS and more of their loved ones added panels in their memory. In 1992, the quilt was displayed in Washington, D.C., spanning the National Mall. By this time, there were over 21,000 panels collected from a total of 28 countries and every single U.S. state. The quilt now weighs 54 tons. This weekend's events at Countway are part of a larger initiative called Creativity in the Time of COVID-19, which has developed an archive of over 2,000 original pieces of pandemic art from across the world. This weekend, we invite you to explore the dozens of pieces we selected for our exhibition on the Art of Grieving, which aims to animate and give shape to some of the experiences people sought to capture during the pandemic, and to memorialize the uniqueness of each life lost to COVID-19. Kristen Urquiza, the executive director and co-founder of Marked by COVID, has created a national COVID memorial, which you can view through augmented reality on the lower level of this building. When you scan the Snapchat code on your phone, you'll be met with a spiral of obituaries. Every day, more people will be lost and remembered. For many, COVID is not over. In the most basic sense, the virus is still in circulation, and public health precautions are still needed. Even as life has returned to a strong semblance of what it was, many of us must continue the grief work that was disrupted by the pandemic. It will take time to mourn the dead. Grieving is an ongoing process. For millions of people, jobs remain lost, the loss of economic stability has lingered, and the return to in-person work, education, and socialization has required renewed resilience from us as individuals and communities. While we have all experienced different forms of loss, we must be mindful of those who are most vulnerable. For the millions with long COVID who are still sick, for the racialized populations who continue to receive disproportionately worse medical care, and for the chronically ill and under-resourced populations, we need to continue to address the concerns that we were confronted with during COVID-19. 2020 has been referred to as a year to forget, but we must remember all the valuable lessons we have learned from our losses. And in that spirit, I'd like us to end with a moment of silence to reflect on our experiences from that time and the losses that remain with us today. Thank you all for being here.